Hey there, y'all. Welcome to today's live stream. Super excited. As you can see here, we've got two guests for you today. Our sort of mini roundtable panel today. We've got Alex Lindley, the managing editor at SEMrush, and Erica Snyder, who's an editor and the founder of Cut the Fluff. We are going to be revealing the secrets that editors actually probably want you to know, but you maybe haven't asked them. We'll be picking their brains, learning about their role as an editor, how they help writers level up, the mistakes that they see writers making, ways that you can improve your writing, all kinds of stuff. So this is a live Q&A, so we will be taking your questions as well. So as we're having our conversation today, would love to have you join us, ask your questions, let us know what information you want to learn, how editors can work better with you, or how you can work better with editors. We want to hear from you. Before we kick things off, let me just do a couple quick announcements. Number one, please hit the like button. As always on the video, it's going to help other folks find us. Number two, if you're not already subscribed to us on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. We'd love to have you. We host at least once a month. We have live Q&As, roundtables, all kinds of great content for freelancers, writers, SEO folks, marketing people in general. Just really smart people coming on, sharing their time and their knowledge. So we'd love to have you subscribe. Next up, if you're not already a member of Tofu, you should join us. We've got over 3,500 members. It's a 100% free community inside Slack. There's all kinds of conversations, questions and answers happening in there, work opportunities being shared. It's just a great community to learn and grow with other super smart people around content marketing, freelance writing, SEO, kind of all of those topics rolled into one. So hit us up, jointofu.co. Again, 100% free. Join us today. We would love to have you there. And last but certainly not least, I want to give a shout out to our sponsors of today's event, Butterdocs. Butterdocs is the replacement for Google Docs that you've been looking for. It's an alternative for professional writers. They have all kinds of awesome features that allow you to collaborate with editors, with your SEO team, with whoever is involved in the content creation process to really control the content workflow and professionalize your content operation. So you're not just fighting constantly over track changes in Google Docs, that kind of thing. Check them out if you haven't already. Hit the link down below this video to check out Butterdocs. You can sign up for a free trial and try it for yourself. All right. With all that said, Alex and Erica, thank you again so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to kick things off and learn all of your secrets. Let's start with a quick intro. So as I mentioned, Alex is the managing editor at SEMrush. Alex, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, kind of how you got into your current role.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. Happy to be here. And I got into my role through journalism. So started editing at my college newspaper and really enjoyed it. Really liked I liked journalism, but I liked the editing more, probably like that specific part. So kind of had a fork in the road in my career a few years ago and started working for an SEO agency that served law firms and really got into the weeds with editing for, I'll use a controversial term in saying SEO content, but I think we all know what I mean when I say that. But started doing that, really got into the weeds of that and kind of fell in love. Went freelance for a while, did some stuff with my own agency, and then found my dream job at SEMrush.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I think so many of us have come from a journalism background that it's always fascinating to kind of hear that story and how everyone has their own kind of take on it. And Erica, so I know you've been sort of doing something new, but tell us a little bit about your background and kind of how you've gotten into where you're at right now.
Yeah, I am not a journalist. I majored in sociology and I minored in film. So I always wanted to be like a screenwriter or like an author, So I think I always wanted to be a writer, but I had no idea how you could make money from writing. And in 2018, I was just wrapping up finishing teaching English to kids in Thailand. And I didn't want to come home. So I needed to continue to figure out how to travel. And that's the first time I ever heard the words Upwork. And I was like, what the hell is Upwork? And I know Upwork gets a bad rap, but that's literally where I started. So I started doing like random editing for random things, totally unrelated to content marketing at first. And then I made my way into the content marketing world through clients And eventually, after writing a bunch of SEO optimized, like terrible blogs, like, you know, I feel like you can't be an SEO editor if you haven't written the worst SEO blog ever. So I did a few of those. And then I slowly realized how to actually do this whole persuasive writing and, you know, without being as creative as I wanted to be, but like holding it back. I figured out the business writing thing. And then on social is when I was like, okay, screw holding back. I'm going to go full creativity. So that's my journey. Yeah, just Upwork. And then I found Grizzle, the agency I was the head of content at, through Upwork, which is the most random thing ever. But yeah, and then from there it was referrals, and now I'm running my own business. My latest thing besides the courses I have is this offer I'm calling Content Sparring, where it's basically a live editing experience, but in person, and we go back and forth on ideas and content, and it's really fun. So yeah.
Amazing. Well, there you have it, kids. Dreams can come true. You can go from Upwork to a successful business owner. So amazing. Well, I'm really excited to dive in today. I know that for a lot of folks, I think, you know, especially on the sort of the writing side of the process, you know, editing can feel very mysterious, right? You know, you're not always clear why editors are giving specific feedback or what they're really looking for, or how they give feedback. And I'm sure that part of your goal as an editor is to eliminate that, right? To sort of close that gap, make it more clear, make sure that everyone sort of understands the feedback that's happening and why they're getting that feedback. So really just excited to dive into your process and all that stuff. I'd love to just start there. Like talk to me about like your personal kind of editing process. Like how do you know, if you open up someone's Google Doc or Butterdoc and you're looking at a draft of an article, what is sort of your actual process? Alex, do you want to share yours first?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah, so it's kind of, I think I start mostly with structure. So looking at the doc, kind of zoom out, you know, if you can look at the table of contents, if there is one, look at the headers off on the left side, use that to sort of be like your movie trailer. Is it communicating the right message? Is it enticing the reader? Is it skimmable? Is it jumpable, or however you want to call it? So start there, look at, is the structure right? Have we got all the right sections? Are the sections communicative, meaning they're not like mysterious? What is the H2 really saying here? What am I about to read, right? Look at that. And once you're either satisfied with that, or you have some comments down for the writer about maybe some things to change, then I go into search intent. So speaking kind of about SEO content in general, but have we served the search intent? Can I tell that from kind of a wide angle that we're getting there, right? We'll get more granular later, but start there. And the reason I start with those two things is because those can be the most substantive changes in articles like this, where these are things where it might not be worthwhile to go in and do a hard edit at the sentence level if we're going to have to completely scrap multiple sections. You know, it's an efficiency question. But, you know, given that you're happy with that, or you have some comments down, then you start to go from the edges, or I start to go from the edges and work in. So the things that are sort of peripheral to the main content. So title tag, meta description, even images, internal links, get that all organized and ready and good, and make sure you're happy with it. And then give it one read for substance, then another read for copy. So that last step is where I look at shortening sentences, cutting out extraneous words, that sort of thing.
I love that too, because I think there's such clarity in recognizing that this is like a very iterative process, right? It's not like you just read through the article from start to finish and like find all of these things at once. Like you're doing multiple passes, deliberately focused on different components or facets of the copy.
Totally.
Yeah. And Erica, what about your process? Is it sort of similar? Do you have kind of your own take on that?
Oh, it's extremely similar to Alex. I think that Alex and I are going to have very similar processes throughout this. And we've actually worked together before too. Alex is like one of the best editors ever, by the way. But yeah, my process is similar. Although I think because Alex is like very much in SEO content over there at Semrush still, I might give it from like a non-SEO view, just in case there's people in here that aren't editing for SEO. So if you're looking at a piece of content and SEO doesn't matter, then the keywords don't really matter, but the intent still does. So rather than search intent, my first question is like, why does this piece of content exist in the first place? Why are we writing this piece of content? Because not every piece of content needs to exist, right? Or it doesn't need to exist right now. So many pieces of content exist that don't need to exist. But what is the point of this content? I really like I was just doing a bit of a fractional editing gig with Beam Content, their agency run by Brooklyn Nash, and I absolutely love their brief template, which is available online and it's free. And they have a section where you have to fill in think, feel, do. What do you want the reader to think when they read this? What do you want them to feel as they're reading this? And what do you want them to do after they read this? And I think that that's a really smart way to frame all of your writing. Like, what are we doing here? Because ultimately, like, resonance matters more than anything. So I'll start there. Why does this piece of content exist? Who are we speaking to? And then what do we want them to do afterwards? So, but just like Alex said, there's 3 types of editing in my point of view. So there's developmental or structural, then there's copy edits, and then there's proofreading. At this point, AI is pretty good at proofreading. Like, I just have Grammarly do a once over at the end to make sure I didn't spell anything stupid. I still do somehow, but the developmental stuff is all about cohesion and narrative flow. So there are a million ways that you can tell a story or take someone through a piece of content. The SEO, typical one is generally the what, why, how, right? So, or like the what and then the steps. Like there's a couple frameworks that fit pretty well into the SEO frameworks. If SEO, or I would argue even for SEO, because we all need to differentiate a bit more now, but the idea that you want to go with is what context do we want to give up front? What's the most important context to start with? And then what's the meat of it? So are we going all in on tactical? Is it more conceptual? And are we trying to make them think more? Are we trying to be like leading thoughts here? So strategic. And so there's the conceptual, strategic, tactical as well. So there's all these different layers, right? And this is all the developmental part. Like, we're not even touching the keyboard yet. We're just reading. And so that's where I'll leave, comments or questions like, hey, is there a reason why this should go is here? Maybe it would go better here. And that's like the fun collaborative, like, thinking part. And then with the copy editing, it's just about, killing the jargon if it's not necessary. All of the things that you see all over social media, like if you can take 10 words and say it in one, you're probably going to want to do that. You're probably going to want to write for a lower sentence level, readability, and all of that stuff, so it's skimmable. And yeah, that's my process.
Great. Yeah, it's super interesting to hear sort of, similar processes, but sort of coming at it from a different lens, which I think is, it's just fascinating to see kind of the same concepts being applied in different ways. Let's just assume that, as you said, this is a pretty iterative process. There are multiple steps involved. If you had to sort of pick or choose, like, let's say, hey, I've only got 30 minutes to spend editing this, like, where do you feel like is sort of the most value in the process of editing?
30 minutes of editing is like the scariest thing I've ever heard in my life. It's not enough time. I don't know how you feel about that. Can you get a piece done in 30 minutes, Alex?
No, not done. Not done. No. But if I had to pick one thing, though, it'd be what you said, intent, search intent in my case, but just why start there. Assuming you can send it back to the writer in this scenario, then start there.
Okay. Totally. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense, right? It's like, does this thing even like do what we're trying to do, right? Is like the most fun question I think you're trying to answer there, right?
Yeah.
Love that. Alex, I'd love to know, like, what are the types of edits, or even specific edits, if you have any, that you find yourself making most frequently?
I mean, outside of like you're almost always going to make a substantive edit especially if you are an expert in the subject that you're editing about, right? If you know how to do it, you're not just editing like as a general purpose editor, then you're almost always going to have like hey, I think it'd be good to get this angle in there. Let's talk about this. That's probably the most common. But if we're outside of substantive, I would say cutting long sentences in two. I mean, it happens almost every paragraph,
I love that. Yeah. And I will say, as a fan of like the shortest possible sentences, like I appreciate the effort there. Yeah. Erica, what about you? Do you have sort of, what are your go-to, what are your signature suggestions or edits that you make most frequently?
By far, the most common question that I will ask is, what do you mean by this? By far. Like, it's crazy how many times, even I, like, because anytime you're writing your first draft, you don't really know exactly what you're trying to say as the words make it from your brain to your fingers. So half the time you type something and then you read it back later and you're like, it's not at all what I meant. My favorite part of working with people, either live or async, is saying, what do you mean by this? And then they're just super casual. They're like, oh, I just mean this, this, and that. And you're like, oh, that's literally not what you said here.
Say
But
that, yeah.
But could you please say that instead? So yeah, that's definitely the biggest edit. What do you mean by this? Also, a super common one is when people make a claim. So they'll say, it's really important that you do this, and then they don't say why. So it's really important that you do this, and then they skip the why, and then they say, here's how to do this, and it's like, okay, but I'm not bought in yet. Unless there was just an entire section about why, you need to tell me why. And even so, logically, it makes your argument stronger when you support it. So that's another big one.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the, like, what do you mean by this? Because I think this is sort of one of the traps that I think writers fall into, myself included, right? Is that as you become more of an expert on whatever you tend to write about, you sort of skip over the obvious things that a reader may not know, right? Because it's obvious to you. And so you're writing and you're like, oh yeah, of course this is obvious. But if it's not actually spelled out, then it may not be obvious to the person who's reading it.
Totally. Yeah. And even if you, like, there's another big question I get usually from writers where it's like, well, my audience knows this already, so why do I have to say it? But even if people know, you should still, to make your argument stronger, back it up a little bit. Like, maybe you don't need an entire H2 on why it matters, but you definitely need a sentence. You have to, and also, if people think that they know something, their perception of what they know is their perception. And as the author, you want to lead their thoughts. Like, you want them to be where you are taking them. Like, you are the puppeteer, essentially, like, as you bring people through it. And you still want them to be able to visualize in their own minds what could happen in real life, but you want to lead them towards a path. You don't want them like all the way over here with their perception if you want them here. So I still say, like, because of that, tell them what you mean by this, so that they aren't getting confused with what they mean by it.
Yeah, that's such a good insight, because if you think about it, right, like, let's just take that example that you mentioned, Erica, right? It's like, okay, this thing is very important for you to do. Now, yes, that may be obvious to everybody, but the reasons why it's important may be totally different, right? I might read that in one way and think something completely different than what you think about why it's important. And so unless you've specified, this is important, here's why, and now here's how to do it, then that context is just totally lost on me as a reader. So I love that sort of takeaway there. Alex, I'd love to know, like, how do you, as an editor, like, how do you sort of determine, or how do you put yourself in the mind of the reader to, like, figure out what the reader may or may not know?
That's a great question. And I mean, it can be kind of hit and miss. You're kind of guessing, but you can always err on the side of going more toward repeating stuff they may kind of know. Sometimes it's a confirmation of something they already know, and that's pleasant for them to read. It helps center them in the subject matter. But yeah, I mean, you start with, I mean, we've had a lot of luck with defining audience levels. So beginner, intermediate, advanced, you can get much more granular than that, but start there. And then, it always, I feel like I've said it 50 times already today, but it goes back to intent, right? What are they looking for? It tells you a lot more than guessing at what they already know, because if you know what they're looking for, you can kind of reverse engineer where they're at, whether you can get into their mind of what they do or don't know. Sometimes you can, or you can guess really well, but if you know what they're looking for, then you can serve them perfectly.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Erica, do you have anything to add there? Anything else that you do to kind of help ground yourself put yourself in the reader's shoes?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what Alex just said. It's much easier to understand the general problem and challenges and, like, desires and jobs to be done than it is to try to guess. You can't guess people's life experience, which is why whenever you're giving examples, you want to give more than one example or a couple different hypotheticals, because you want to, like, you are guessing, like, you're hoping that they've come into this problem. It's educated guesswork based on understanding the market and the problems that they face generally. It also really helps to talk to people beforehand if you can. So if you have customer stories, or I don't know if you're working internally, if you have sales teams or customer success teams that you can get all this information from, or if you can even talk to customers yourself, like that would be amazing. The subject matter experts that deal with them in your company, the people who are closest to the customer, are going to be able to tell you what they're struggling with. And then you can take those examples and like feed them back in the content so that they see themselves in a mirror.
Oh, fascinating. Okay, you're getting more advanced on us already, Erica. So I'd love to just play devil's advocate for a second. Like, where's the boundary between like going back to the basics, explaining things that people may know, but helping sort of shore that up, and sort of going too basic where you're sort of explaining things that are truly obvious? How do you kind of find that balance?
I mean, it depends on audience. It's all about your audience level. So I will intentionally say something a little bit simpler or less complex. I don't know if you can see doing my little finger things. I will do that intentionally if I'm speaking to people that I know are likely more at the beginning of their journey. Or if I'm going for like a broader awareness play and I want the most amount of people to see this. It's the same thing with readability. Like the less jargon and the broader language that you can use that is understood amongst the largest group of people is going to help the largest group of people understand what you're saying. So definitely want to say that. But for example, when I was working at Grizzle, one of our clients was CXL, and they market to experienced marketers. So like the idea of telling people, what is thing was like, what the hell? Like, why would you do that? You're speaking to CMOs. They don't need to know like what is content marketing, right? So it literally comes down to your audience. In that sense, you wouldn't have a what is X thing. You would just have a sentence that's like, we all know that like content marketing is this, but is it really? Like something like that. And then you would challenge them and go in with your own thoughts on it or your new spin of talking about it. So it literally, like the way that you talk depends entirely on who you're talking to and what their intent is.
Love that. Alex, any other thoughts on that? How do you know if something is sort of too basic?
Yeah. I mean, Erica said it best. The audience, knowing who your audience is or your intended audience is everything in that regard. I will add in, long form like blog content. I think sometimes we get a little too wrapped up in not repeating stuff that people already know. I think personally it's better to err on the side of putting everything there to be as inclusive as possible. Not to the greatest extent possible, but if you're not sure, it's probably better to define a term. And keeping in mind too, with that particular kind of content, people just skim. It's depressing for writers and editors, but they look for the header that matches what they're really looking for. So if you defined a term they already knew the definition of in the intro or the second section or whatever, they probably didn't see it. And so you didn't hurt anything, but you probably helped the person who did read that section who didn't know that term.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And yeah, such an important thing to remember, I think, for writers is that yeah, obviously the content matters, and having all that content in there is important. But as you've both already touched on, like the structure and sort of the navigability of the content is perhaps even more important, because people are going to have their own journey through that content. So let's sort of take it from the other side. I'd love to know, like, when you're working with a writer, let's say, like, what are some questions that you either wish a writer would ask, or what are some of the best questions that you've gotten from a writer that you think were really helpful? Erica, you want to kick us off?
I suppose that depends on how detailed the brief is. And there's like a whole argument on LinkedIn at the moment. I mean, always, but I've seen it recently about how long briefs should be, right? So like, I think I saw something recently that was like, if a brief is longer than 1 or 2 pages, like you've failed, right? But Beam's briefs are sometimes like 4 pages because they include tons of like SME insights from interviews. So it entirely depends on how much is in the brief. If you get a really bare bones brief and you have questions and you don't feel confident that you understand exactly who you're speaking to, the think, feel, do, the narrative frame, those are really important questions to get clarity on, because it's going to be helpful. I also love when a writer comes back to me and they're like, hey, I see that in this H2, like you referenced maybe including this example. Maybe they've gone off and done their own research at this point. So then they'll say, hey, like, I was actually doing my own research and I came across this. What do you think about that? Like, I absolutely love the collaborative nature. When a writer like really wants to make sure that what they are giving you on draft one is going to be like, I don't know what your percentage is, Alex. Like, I always wanted it to be at least 70% there. So like, it's frustrating when, I think the most frustrating thing as an editor is when I'll be like, hey, why'd you do this? And they'll be like, oh, I wasn't quite sure if I should do that or not, so I just did it. And it's like, oh, I wish you would have said something, because then we could have worked through that while you were still writing, because now I can only kick it back to you one time, right? So the more that we can collaborate before you sit down and spend your time doing it is the better. But I don't know if that's just a me thing. Alex, what do you think?
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. The collaborative part can eliminate so many of these like post-writing questions, or even post-first round editing questions or problems, really. And it's kind of in line with a question I wish that I was asked more often, which is sort of maybe a comment highlighting a section is like, hey, I wasn't sure what to do here, so I have two options. Here's what I went with, but here's my other option. So as editors, we are trained to like find those shaky spots, right? And make those changes and have to kick it back to the writer and say, here's what I think you should do. But if they go ahead and highlight that for you and then ask you, what should I do? How can I improve this? To hyper focus in on that. You're delivering value for the writer in a way that you're not sure you are if you just identify a section they didn't ask about and just say, hey, this is weak. I mean, on the like content level, yeah, you're providing value because you're improving it ostensibly, right? But if they ask about it and you're able to answer and give your 2 cents, that collaboration level goes way up, trust goes way up, and I think the end product is a lot better.
Totally.
I love that as a suggestion, because it's such a simple thing, but I almost never come across writers that do that by default, right? Like leave comments in their own draft before it goes to editing. Like I think they're just waiting for the feedback, and they don't really think to like make it a dialogue proactively.
I think editors have a bad rap of being like these scary monster people that are going to hurt your ego. And
100% true.
I get it. Like when I first started writing, I had a couple editors like that and they absolutely sucked and it wasn't fun. But I mean, as every writer learns, editors are also doing the best that they can and they're not always right. So just know that, like, if an editor is on a high horse and is like, I'm always right, then like that's frustrating. But hopefully you come across editors that are like nice people, like Alex and I. And maybe that's on us then, the editors, to onboard better. I'm not sure. Like now that I'm thinking back, I think I would always say like, please ask me questions, but it's intimidating. So maybe there's a better way to do it, but it honestly makes it so much better. My favorite is like what Alex just described, where maybe they don't ask me questions, but they just comment. They'll just tell me something, or in the whatever workflow, like ClickUp or whatever we're using, they'll say, hey, like, this is what I was thinking. It's so nice to know what the writer was thinking when you go into it, because generally I'm going to be asking you, what were you thinking here? So if you can get ahead of that, that's really cool.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So yeah, well, maybe a tip there for writers is that, like, it sounds like as an editor too, you prefer that the writers are sort of leading that dialogue again. So it's not just like, I'm going to throw it over the wall and wait for the feedback to come back, but I'm proactively going to share, areas where perhaps I wasn't sure, or questions I had about the structure or the content itself, or any of those types of things. And then again, turn that into a dialogue. And I think that's a great little way for writers to, I think, maybe elevate themselves in the eyes of the editors and the rest of the team.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Cool. Well, I want to, first of all, I just want to real quick mention once again that if you're joining us on the live stream, I'm already seeing some questions coming in. So if you do have questions for Alex and Erica, please post those in here. We will get to them. I've got a lot of my own questions, and we'll sort of work them in as they make sense. But please post those questions in the chat, and I'll pull them up as they make sense. I'd love to kind of dig into content quality and sort of the editing that you're doing, and how you're helping writers improve. what are, let's say like 3 things that you think that separate, sort of a good piece of content from a great piece of content? Alex, do you want to take that first?
Oh yeah, gosh, that's a good one. So good to great. Information gain, and I don't mean in the like machine learning or even Google algorithm or patent perspective, but in, are we adding something to the conversation? A good piece of content can be sort of samey content that delivers well, right? It executes better than the competition. But if you can add something new, proprietary data, a contrarian take, something like that, that can be great content way more easily. I think we've touched on this a lot so far, but I think that just for a good reason, radical focus on the reader and where they're at, what they need. That's great content material. And then actionability. And I know this is not universal for everything you might ever write about, but even if you give them just something, just some tiny little thing to go do to like improve their experience with the subject that you're speaking about, it just adds, it's so much more memorable. And it just the experience is so much more satisfying. It gives the content much more heft if you can give something actionable as much as possible, but even just a little something, one thing. If you can't make the whole thing actionable, just end with something actionable.
Love those. Love those. Erica, you're up.
So this is universal, but it applies differently depending on the medium. So I will give my 3 and then say I think how it applies based on the medium. So I think my top thing that makes content good is having a point of view. And like, it's so easy to create the same content, just like Alex said, that everyone else is creating if you're just giving the very basic high level without your take on it. The way that you build brand resonance and get people excited to read your content is if they feel like they're going to look at it from your point of view. Like we really can't say too many things that are new or interesting. So what's your take on it? And that spin is going to help make people know, like, and trust you more. So have a point of view. It's harder to do in blog posts when you are from a company that has, a 100-page brand doc and everybody has a say in what your point of view is. So that is harder to do. And I am speaking to you, Alex, because SEMrush has a super long brand guidelines, which are really helpful, but they are very long. On social, it's so like if you are writing on social as yourself, or if you're ghostwriting for someone on social, like go hard on the point of view. That is the only way to stand out on social. Have a freaking point of view. The second one is personality. And that one is a little bit hard to kind of translate into writing. And again, harder for a business. But for example, I just wrote a landing page for myself the other day, and I sent it to a couple of people and said, hey, what do you think about this landing page? And their problem with it was not that the writing was bad, but it didn't sound like me. And they were completely right. It's because I hate writing landing pages and it's my least favorite thing to write. So I stepped away from it for a couple of days, went back, and then made it me, which is just my silly phrasing that I use. Like that's me. People understand if I take my name off of it and they see that silly phrasing, they'll know it's me. So if your brand has something like that, then try to lean into that, because again, that's what makes you memorable. And then similar to what Alex said with the actionable thing, my big thing is some sort of a takeaway, some sort of a lesson, whether it's obvious or a little bit more subtle. There has to be a reason, like a big why. What is the big why for this, why this piece exists? So make sure that you are either sprinkling that in at the top, at the bottom, throughout, but you need like a thesis. There has to be a reason, and that reason should be obvious and felt.
I love the mix of sort of like the content and the substance and the style. There's just so many different levers there, but I love that all of those kind of play a role in really elevating the content, and being able to do all of those things is obviously a hard skill, right? that's what separates good writers from great writers.
What separates good writers from great writers, in my opinion, is editing.
Yeah, fair enough. Hey, that's I'd love to take a quick step back and talk a little bit about the editing process again, and then we'll talk a little bit about kind of like frameworks and systems that you might use. But we did have some questions in the chat. Being Accessible was asking how many rounds of edits are typical and how many rounds are too much for something like a blog post or article. Alex, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a moving target depending on your industry, the experience level of the writers and the editors, as well as how good was the brief. You know, if the brief was flawed, which happens a lot, then you might have to throw an extra round in there. But I would say 2 rounds of edits is fairly typical. I think you get to 3 or more and you start to, I feel obnoxious if I ask for a 3rd round of edits. And I know that also there's an economics question for the writers themselves, you know, efficiency, their ability to make their living. If you're making them rewrite stuff over and over again, that's not fair. So I think 2 rounds and be prescriptive about it. You know, that's probably the best thing is just say we do 2 rounds of edits, not we edit until it's ready. You know, you have to hold your own self accountable for catching everything as well.
Love that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Most of the writers that I work with, and this is what I would recommend if you're a writer, is to offer 1 round of heavy edits and then like a second light edit if necessary. But generally, if you're a freelancer, I wouldn't say a client should kick it back to you more than 2 times ever. Usually 1 time is the average. If you're in-house, that totally depends on the workflow. But yeah, if the brief is good and you are collaborating the right way up front, then it should be 70% there on draft 1, as long as you've done a self-edit. So like, don't just expect that your editor is going to clean it up for you. And by that, I don't just mean copy edits. I mean like thinking, like your ideas and why you said things. Take a step away from it. Give yourself enough time, even if it's just an hour away, if it's due that day. But like go through it again and literally ask yourself, what do I mean here? Does this align with the brief? Like look at the brief. Like checklists help here. Eventually you won't need them because it becomes intuitive, but there are checklists that exist. And if you want one and you don't have one, there's plenty that are free, or you can ask the client that you're working for. But checklists are really useful here. But yeah, 2 edits maximum. And then for the editor, if you want to be an editor, like that depends. So you're allowed to kick it back to the writer 1, maybe 2 times maximum. But then if you send it to the client, for example, like when I was at an agency and the client's not super happy with it for whatever reason, that could be a million reasons. That's on you, the editor. Like if you have to rewrite the whole thing, you have to rewrite the whole thing. So.
Yeah, it's such interesting to think about sort of that like sort of chain of command, if you will, of like, you know, who is responsible at which stages for which people being happy with the content and where it's at.
Whoever's paying for the content generally has the final say.
Yeah, that's usually how it works. Yeah, it turns out. I love that. Another question here from the audience. Bex was asking if you're coming in as an editor and maybe you're not a subject matter expert. So like Alex, you know, I know you obviously are editing a lot of content about content marketing and SEO topics, so you're probably more familiar. But if, let's say, you are not an expert and you're being tasked with editing content, like any tips for how to tackle that?
There is really no replacement for subject matter expertise. So give yourself time to read the foundational documents of whatever industry or subject that you're editing about. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to actually be an expert, but you really can't just go in cold. You can't just dive in. My opinion is you can't dive in, especially on a technical topic, cold and just try to make it make sense or verify facts as you go. You need to start from a place of at least a broad understanding of this is generally what we're talking about here. This is generally how this works. Outside of that, if you really don't understand the subject matter, if it's really just something that you can't do that, like reading a few things, or you don't have the time, then you need to verify everything twice. So every claim, everything that is able to be substantiated, you go verify it with an official source and then verify it again with a separate source. That comes from journalism. I think it's a very good rule of thumb for avoiding embarrassing factual errors.
For sure. What about you, Eric? I know obviously you've also worked at an agency, so I'm sure you've tackled many subjects that you were not an expert in going into.
It's pretty crazy, the things that I've edited that I have no idea what the hell is going on. So I've been in this position many times. There's 2 ways that I handle it. The first is try to get ahead of it before it's written, if that's possible. I don't know where you are in the workflow, but if you're going to be doing a super technical piece, like force the client to give you an interview and talk to you about it, because they are the ones who know, they are the ones who should know these things. So you can lean a lot on their subject matter expertise. If that is not possible, and say that you're given a draft, it's already been done, and you had no say in anything up to this point, go research everything and find the sources, yes. But for what helps me the most is hearing other people talk about it, not just reading it. So like, I'll go find, even if it's gated, I'll go find a webinar or something on the topic and just familiarize myself at like the highest level possible. Once I feel like I'm comfortable with that, then I'll try to go a level deeper and a level deeper. Like, it takes time. It is not easy if you don't know the subject matter expertise, if you don't know the subject matter, but it's really, really embarrassing and like factually dangerous to sign off on a piece that you haven't verified. So you have to go spend hours familiarizing yourself with the topic. You just do. You have to learn a lot of random things.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think one of the fascinating things that we've learned over the years is like how much just comes down to like the very specific language that people use, right? Like some certain industry will be like, we don't say you do this in a software, you say we do it on this software, or like, you know, there's like very specific phrasing that is like super specific to certain industries and certain roles that you just don't know unless you, like you said, you sort of familiarize yourself and sort of immersed yourself in that particular universe.
Yeah. The other way, because now I'm seeing that this person said that they do work at an agency, the other way to do it, and I don't know what your workflow is, like if you have access to the client or not, but I would leave a comment if I really can't figure it out. And I'll just say like exactly what I was saying I want writers to do. I will say as the editor, hey, I have spent time looking at this, this, and this. Here's the source that has told me this. Can you please verify? Because I want to make sure it's right. And then that, again, like builds trust with the client that you've done everything you can. And now you just want them to sign it off. And they'll be really happy that you did that. And they'll give you the information that you wish you had first, last, and then you'll still eventually get it.
Yeah, and if we can kind of bring it all the way back to the point from before as well, I think, you know, if that starts with the writer, you know, because presumably the writer is perhaps not a subject matter expert either. So if they're, you know, asking questions that they're not clear about, then that gives you a clear, you know, clear visibility into the things that you should be looking at more closely. And then, you know, and then on the other end of that, you can be also sort of flagging those same things proactively for the client, and that just creates a much better feedback loop, I think, overall.
Totally. Cool. If the writer is an expert, though, then just talk to the writer a lot.
Right. Fair enough.
Get on a call with them and be like, hey, I'm editing this. Literally walk me through this. Like, why?
Yeah. Just want to give a quick shout out. Ron, I do see your question down there. We're not ignoring you. I'm going to get to sort of more specific content level things in a moment here. So we will bring that up. Real quick, I want to kind of go back to sort of high level, you know, kind of the structure and the meat of the content. Alex, are there any frameworks or like specific models that you use as an editor or as a writer?
This is a knowledge gap for me. I should know more about the various, you know, frameworks and models and things than I do, but I do subscribe to starting very broadly with your H1 or your title, headline, whatever you want to call it. Every additional H2 or secondary level header should answer the question or subject posed by the H1. Every H3 under the H2 should answer so on and so forth, right? Should answer the H2 it's under. You can take that all the way down to the paragraph and sentence level, which I like to do. And I find that if you do that, it is in itself a framework for cutting out fluff and extra words and sentences without even having to think too hard about it. Because if you're really strict about it and be like, this sentence or this header is really not speaking to the central question or subject or theme posed by what's above it, what it's under, then it needs to go. Either it needs to be cut completely or moved somewhere else. That's probably the main one. Now, my current focus and, you know, breadth of experience is more focused on long form blog content, SEO content, right? So I'm sure that Erica probably has a much better, more in-depth perspective on that. But that's my main framework.
Well, I think it's fascinating because, yeah, I mean, I feel that there's sort of two universes of writers. I feel like some people who, you know, are 100% into frameworks, and some people who are just like sort of, you know, have kind of their own methodology perhaps, but they don't really ascribe to any particular one. Erica, I know in our last live session that we did with you, where we talked about social writing. By the way, if you haven't checked that out, go check it out on our YouTube. We talked a lot about frameworks. So yeah, I'd love to know what are some of your top frameworks that you tend to use.
Yeah. I learned how to write SEO content, interestingly, with the SCQA framework. So Alex, tell me if this resonates with anything you do over there, but it's situation and then challenge, and then you like answer the challenge. And then wait, SCQ. Oh, then you ask a question and then you answer it. So it's like situation, like content marketing is important. I'm literally don't ever write this. This is just an example. Content marketing is important, and then challenge, like, but it's hard to do content marketing because, hard. And then question, like, so what do you do about it? Answer, like, answer in the blog. So like, that's how I learned to originally write intros, which now like intros, I know we were going to talk about intros in this, but like intros have to be more and more interesting these days because it's just like a hot topic. Like no one's going to read a boring intro. But you can also do your whole blog like that. So you can have your first H2 as like the situation, then the challenge, and then maybe the question is just a transition sentence, and then kind of like the solution. So that's one way to do it. Another really popular one that a lot of long form and short form use are the problem, agitate, solution. So this is the problem. I'm going to agitate the problem and make you like really, really, really want to solve it. And now I'm going to tell you how to solve it. Like, surprise, it's me. I'm the solution. So that's another one too. When I was working at CXL, they told us as the agency that when I was working at Grizzle, CXL was client, they told us about something called HTAS. I think it was like header, thesis, antithesis, solution, or synthesis. I don't know. It kind of all means the same thing. It's basically like, here's the situation, here's the challenge, here's how to get ahead of the challenge. But Alex, you skipped Bluff. That's like SEMrush's thing.
I was just gonna say that. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Erica.
Yeah, right. Bluff. Yeah, pretty much. I meant to say Bluff, so Bluff.
we put the bottom line at the end in this case.
There we go. Example of what not to do. Yeah.
If you're not familiar with Bluff, bottom line up front, as Erica pointed out, is sort of a hallmark, I would say, of SEMrush's writing style, which is every section, every article, everything sort of leads with the most important information up front and at the very top. Anything else you want to say about that, Alex, or maybe how you have sort of stuck with that principle?
Yeah, Bluff is hard. It just is. It's not. It sounds so simple, but it is like the hardest thing to get right as an editor or writer. I think those who come from a journalism background recognize it as the inverse pyramid. There's other ways to call it. So if you think, sometimes it's easier to think about it in that way. But yeah, it's painful. I think maybe more than like conceptually difficult. It's painful for people who love words, who want to like have this moment of sort of, exposition, to sort of explain yourself and the content and everything. And really, you need to put the bottom line up front, as Bluff suggests. And that is completely contrary to the exposition part in so many cases. So just, kind of gritting your teeth and being okay with it hurting a little bit is really important, I think, for getting Bluff down. But I think also with a lot of the frameworks that you can apply, like Bluff or any of the ones that sound really awesome that Erica was mentioning, if you reverse engineer really great content, if you look at how it's laid out, you start to see these frameworks, whether you know what they're called or whether you meant to, either you're the writer, maybe you didn't even mean to employ them, but you did a good job, and so you set up the problem in the right way that's going to be enticing to the reader. You walked backwards into one of those frameworks.
Totally. I will say one of the things that I really like about the concept of Bluff is that as a writer, it forces you to think critically about what you're trying to communicate before you communicate it, right? I mean, it's so like, you could communicate anything if you spend 10 pages sort of circling around it, and eventually you get there. But to force yourself to like summarize what am I actually trying to say here in one sentence is obviously perhaps the most difficult part of all writing, right? And so to sort of do that up front, or at least challenge yourself to do that in every section or every article, I think is a valuable exercise for sure.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, I'd love to. You sort of mentioned hooks here, and I think that's a good transition because I want to get into some of like the sort of specifics at the content level. I know we've only got about 10 minutes, so we'll try to get some quick tips from you all. But first of all, Alex, I want to know, like, how do you sort of balance the bluff concept with the idea of, you know, sort of a hook or engaging the reader in the way that a lot of people think of it?
Yeah, I mean, there's room to budge on bluff in some cases. It depends on the topic and the audience level, but really, I think it's a mindset shift of understanding that, yeah, there, of course, hook writing is a whole discipline, and like there's a lot to say there, but really, in a lot of content scenarios and where you're engaging with a reader, bluff is the most engaging hook. They came looking for something, and there's really nothing better than that, right? Than just giving them exactly what they're looking for right up front, right? No hook really can replace that. It can only entice the reader to keep reading. We often will skip an intro completely at SEMrush for this very reason. Sometimes there is no need to hook. It is just simply it from the keyword we're trying to rank for, or whatever. We know, well, this is what the reader is looking for. No hook required, right? That they're already hooked if they saw us in the search results. So we just give them exactly what they're looking for up front.
I do think that's a great and important distinction, right? Is that like the style of writing and sort of how you craft these hooks and things is so dependent on the context. You know, as you just mentioned, Alex, you know, if you're coming from search, I'm not necessarily looking to be like entertained or like, you know, shocked or whatever. I'm just looking for the information that I clicked on the link to find. Whereas, you know, I know, Eric, obviously you do a lot of like social writing, where, you know, the hook is, you know, sort of a prerequisite, I think, for getting people's attention. So like, what are some of the ingredients, or what are some of your tricks for writing great hooks, Erica?
Yeah, I just want to preface my answer with, on search, you have the luxury of a title, and on social you do not. Like, you cannot title your post with the, you know, the 5 ways, whatever. But you can, though, in the hook if you want to. Like, that is a version of a hook. But yeah, so nobody's going to social and typing in intent keywords necessarily. Like, you can, but like most people are just scrolling, which is why you need a hook. So really the only thing that matters with hooks is to open a curiosity gap so that people are intrigued to press see more. Like, that's what it really comes down to. So whether that's giving people what they want, like the 10 types of hooks that work best, like colon, right? That's giving people exactly what they want, but it's also a curiosity gap because you have to press see more to see the 10 hooks, right? So the secret with social writing is that you don't want to give everything away up front. Like, you don't want to say, you don't want people to see before they click see more the 10 best hooks that matter, and then like list out all 10 if that was possible without them clicking see more. You want them to have to click see more because once they do, they're invested. So yeah, but I mean, there are so many ways to do that curiosity thing, and you should just go watch the hour that I rambled about it on.
I was just gonna say,
on the YouTube page, because I'm not gonna stop myself if I get started. Just go watch that.
Yeah, that's a great way to frame it too. Is that, yeah, like the curiosity gap is already like an innate feature of search, right? Like, if somebody's searching for something, they are, by definition, they have a gap of, you know, that they're trying to fill. So I think that's a great way to frame it. But yeah, another shout out, if you haven't already, go back, watch the live stream we did with Erica. I don't know what it was, like 3 or 4 months ago. We dove much deeper into social copywriting, writing hooks, that kind of stuff. So if that's something that you're interested in, definitely encourage you to check it out. How about on the other side of it, Alex, what makes a great conclusion?
A great conclusion, I'm probably not going to make any friends saying this, but some of the greatest conclusions don't exist. We often don't need a conclusion. Like, the greatest conclusion is for the article to simply end. I know is counter to everything we all learned in school and in our jobs in content marketing, content creation. But it is just true that a lot of times, if a conclusion can't really add value, it can't say the takeaway in a better way than it's already been said elsewhere in a high visibility part of the piece of content, it maybe doesn't need to exist. Outside of that, if you do have a conclusion, which in most cases you need a conclusion, I'm being a little bit facetious, but a lot of times you don't, and it's I think that's true. But anyway, if you do, it's really strong in my eyes if it's not too repetitive. This whole wrapping up thing where you just repeat the main points is not helpful. But it does need to give a takeaway that ties everything together. And then even better, bonus points, next steps. So what happens next? What do I need to go do next? Do I need to read this other article? Do I need to go try this thing? Do I need to download this thing? Do I need to sign up for your email newsletter? Even if you can offer some value in that, that goes back to that actionability right there at the end. It's memorable. So those would be my main ones for the conclusions.
Yeah, makes sense. Erica, any thoughts on conclusions?
Yeah, I'm going to give mine based on medium again because it varies. So if you're writing a blog, it's everything that Alex just said. I don't really have much to add except that my favorite way to think about it mentally is that you want to synthesize, not summarize. So you do not ever want to summarize. That is so incredibly boring. Like final thoughts and conclusion, like those should never be your H2s, even though those were the H2s I used for like the first couple of years I was writing. You definitely want to give people something to do. Like, where am I going next, right? So that's really important in long form. In social writing, your conclusion is usually that like really sexy final sentence that kind of like slaps. There's usually some sort of like alliteration or maybe it's a CTA. But my favorite way to play with conclusions on social is to make sure that it ties into the hook. So this works actually for social and for blog writing. If you are struggling with a conclusion, read your introduction again, cover everything in the middle, and then write your final thought based on like where you would naturally progress from the introduction. So if you're saying, 10 things to do this, then what's your final thought at the end of that? Try to write that without thinking about what you wrote in the middle. If you ended up repeating yourself, then you need to do it again. But how can you synthesize this into a different way to say the same thing, but with an action? Like it needs to be more actionable.
I love that. Well, we're getting down to our final minutes. So I want to, first of all, I got to follow through my promise to Ron and make sure we get his question answered, which is how do you balance, sort of the idea of like sounding sophisticated or using like big words versus like being accessible? Alex, any thoughts on that?
Don't use the big words. In almost every case, it doesn't sound sophisticated. And even if you're writing for a technical audience, the most sophisticated way to sound is to be extremely clear, to get your message across exactly the way it's supposed to. Now, I'm not saying that jargon never is useful. Sometimes it is. It's a way of speaking about a complicated topic with a single word or phrase. But in general, opt for clarity, opt for accessibility for all slices of your potential audience, not just the most technical among them. Go accessible to most people. Err on that side if you're not sure, and you almost never are totally sure.
Any additional thoughts there?
No, I defer to Alex on that one.
Awesome. Well, I apologize to folks. I think we had a couple other questions in there. I don't think we're gonna have time to get to everything. First of all, I just want to say thank you again, Alex and Erica, for taking the time to join us today. This was awesome. Thank you as well to Butterdocs for making this session possible. Again, if you haven't already, hit the link. It should be in the description on YouTube. And also want to invite you to join us at jointofu.co. I would love to have you over there. Final question for y'all. Erica, what is a content hill you're willing to die on?
Content hill I'm willing to die on. Oh my. If you don't have anything interesting to say, just don't say anything. Not everything needs to be content.
I
love that. Alex, what about you?
Oh, it's such a good one. It's hard to top. I'll just repeat myself. Put the reader first. You're never going to go wrong doing that. Just be empathetic. If you don't have empathy skills, work on them like yesterday, and your content will be so much better.
I love how Erica's content hill is also sort of like Alex's like contrarian advice, right? It's like if you don't have a good thing to say in your conclusion, then like don't write a conclusion, just in the article. I think we're at yes on that one. Amazing. Well, once again, thank you, Alex. Thank you, Erica. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you for all your questions. Please join us in Tofu. Hit like, hit subscribe, do all that stuff, and we'll see you on the next stream. Cheers, y'all.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.